Just listen to the birds chirping, that lovely wind through my ears. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're going to be getting started on a series of this lovely airplane that is actually one of the first airplanes that I ever actually completed a long cross-country solo. And that, of course, is the Piper Warrior. One of the interesting things about this plane, of course, is in flight training. When I first got started with it, it was a little different because I had spent all of my flight training flying in Cessna 172. So when I finally got an opportunity to fly something with the Piper logo on it that had a wing on the bottom instead of the top, it was a rather interesting experience. So what we hope to show in this series of three little videos here is kind of, so the whole idea of operating this airplane, some of the kind of quirks, and of course, some of the stories along the way of all the goofy fun things that we did while we were riding around in it. So we're right now in Block Island State Airport. It is the middle of the winter. It's pretty darn cold outside. I actually was looking at that earlier. And because we're in Block Island, of course, and we've got real world weather enabled, you can see that we have a very substantial wind component, which anybody who's ever been down here in the real world knows. By the way, they did such a nice job on that. The Block Island State Airport here. There actually used to be a restaurant right here, and I can't actually see it anymore, which kind of disappoints me a bit. But like you have little windows, and people will come out here to watch, and like there's a little air kind. They did a nice job on this airport, to say the least. So what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at the Piper Warrior in detail across three videos here. First video is going to be about getting this thing in the air, of course. The second video is going to be dedicated to kind of doing the navigating thing. And the third video, of course, is going to get this thing down on the ground. And unfortunately for me, I have a lot of experience with the older brother of this plane, which is the Piper Archer 3. That's actually one of the ones I fly quite a bit. And there is a Just Flight Piper Archer 3 out there. It's just a little bit more it's $45 for a general aviation plane. Are you kidding me? Nice try, Just Flight. So anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the interior here. As you can see, it's a little dark in here. One of the things they do give us on certain versions of the Piper is there's actually a dome light. It's kind of a nice little thing here. But the downside with the dome light, let me go ahead and show you real quickly here, is if I pop this sucker on, it's a little red in here, but again, in the real world, I have a winter hat, like a typical winter hat, and in the middle of the winter hat is a big bright red light. So one of the things you could actually do is climb in here. So the Piper Warrior is a tiny plane, but it's not tiny in the sense of like 152 tiny, where you're on top of the person sitting next to you. It's tiny in the sense that you can't really put anybody in the back seat and still be able to fly the plane. You just don't have the weight capacity for it. That's okay, though, because this is really a training plane or kind of a personal plane. This is definitely not one of those let's go. So one of the things that the folks over at Just Flight actually gave us here is they give us this little handy-dandy little panel that gives us a bunch of options here. The reason we care about this, of course, is, there it is, 35 degrees. Woo-hoo! The reason they give this, of course, is we can get this thing started right away. But they actually have things for the battery. They have things for the oil. They even give you warnings. You can turn a co-pilot on. Again, this is a kind of a neat little setup here, auto fuel selector. You can pick your GPS. I've got the GPS 100 because why not? You can even turn the HSI on or off. Of course, if you shut it off, you get one of those, which is, that's what I'm used to, but obviously you can turn it back on. I appreciate the trim. You can turn the yokes on. Of course, you got all this junk all connected to us. We don't need one of those. And of course, if we were a training plane, we wouldn't have wheel fairings. If you're curious why, it's on account of the fact that you change a lot of tires if you're a training airplane. The reason being, of course, is that people are, not that they're rough with it, but you're going to go through a lot of tires in flight training. It's just kind of one of those things. So the Piper Archer, of course, and one of the things I'll do now that I've kind of established sort of how nice it looks right now, I'm going to go make it just a little bit later in the day here so you can get a better look at what it looks like inside. Nice. The one thing about the Piper Warrior that I didn't know the first time I got into one of these things, of course, is where it's located, how to get in it, sort of a thing like that. You actually have two different mechanisms for locking and unlocking the door, which surprises us right away. But what you do is you come up here and on the roof, and let's go ahead and if I could show this to you real quick so you can see it a little better. There's actually a little handle here for unlocking that part of the door, and then there's a separate handle here for unlocking that part of the door. So what you would do is you crank both of these, you climb up the wing, you jump on inside, you go skirt, skirt, and do the best you can not to step on the seat, please. When you step on the seat, that's kind of bad form because you're going to damage the seat and they get a little rough. This is especially true with the different airplanes as well. So you'd close it, of course, you go, lock that one, you lock that one, and you'd have a moment as a pilot here when you sit here going, how do I get out if there's a problem? And the person who sits next to you goes, eh? That's okay. We open the window even though it's freezing outside. Perfectly fine. So one of the things we do when we first check it is you'll notice the presence of a flaps lever here. This is not a button. This is a handle. When I pull this, you are physically adjusting the position of the flap immediately. What you don't realize is this little tiny button on here. What you do is you squeeze the button down. You have to pull back a little bit like a handbrake on a car. You pull it and you go click, 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 click. But one of the fun things about this handle here is if I want full flaps, I can push all the way down on the button and pull the handle all the way towards me, and I've instantly got full flaps. Likewise, if I squeeze the trigger, go ba 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 ba, and slam this thing onto the floor, your flaps stop. That allows us, of course, to do the dreaded hop takeoff, which is about as dangerous as you can get in takeoffs. But it's kind of fun because you can really feel it. And of course, when you're taking off or you're going around, you can sit here and lower the flaps lever gently. Oh, by the way, what hand is running the throttle if you're using that? You see the problem, but that's perfectly fine. So we're going to assume that we've done our pre-flight here. Everything's looking pretty good here. I'm just taking a look through. We got plenty of oil. I can charge the battery up. Does not matter kind of a thing. I love how they give you all this like flight information on the bottom here. This is, like I said, I kind of appreciate that. And we can shut this sucker off too. One thing we're going to do is we're going to pop those off, and we're going to leave the fuel thing off because that's perfectly fine. So getting this thing started in the winter is different than Cessna 172. On 172, it's prime, 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 let's go. This thing is very much prime, we're good enough, kind of a thing like that. So if you take a look here, and I go ahead and remove it, you'll notice we have the engine primer here, which is super duper handy. It's this little piece here. And what you would do, of course, is you'd set your seat and get it all locked together. I know I make fun of this every single one of these videos as I come down here and I point out there's not enough detail in the seat. There's not enough detail in the seat, folks. There's a handle here, but that's okay. So the other thing you have to do when you adjust the seat too, and we don't see this in the real world or in the sim, is there's a wheel here and you crank it and trying to get your head in the correct height. Because every time you get in, the guy who was before you was too short and like his view's up here and you get in and your view's down here. It's just part of the fun of aviation that we just don't experience in a sim, but that's perfectly fine for me. The other thing we don't see here too is when you get in the plane, this wheel is actually like this, and there's a little thing wrapped around it to basically hold it in position. But we don't get that either. And again, it's not a bad thing. It's just different. All right, so here we go. So what we do is we plop down, we get our seats. So make sure all the radio stuff is off. One of the things we did not shut off is that lovely light above our heads here, because that will slowly deplete your battery. I like how this changes color. Whoopsies. Coming in here, of course, whoa, ho, ho, ho. Don't want to get intercepted. All right, so what you would do, of course, is you climb inside this thing, and you sit down, you get your safety belt set, you run around, you'd shut all the different switches off. And this is really an important component here, because if you didn't do that, you would basically run the battery down. And one of the fun things they give you is this big honking avionics switch, which I really appreciate. They also give you this thing here. They have a nice little fan, a legit fan inside of this airplane. This is nice. You don't get stuff like that in the older models. Like, you have to rely on whatever window you've got. It's just kind of one of those things. So what we do now is that we get our circuit breakers and we check them. They're good. I like how in this simulation they actually do circuit breakers properly. Nice job. Afterwards, of course, we do the carburetor heat. We make sure that's off. Carburetor heat in this aircraft is basically, I'm not going to say it's unnecessary, but it kind of is because of the positioning of the engine. But we'll get to that in a minute. Take a look next. We go to the fuel selector, which is on our left here. We just pop it to the whatever side we're on. Looking at my clock right now, it is, let's see, about 7:44. So that's the right side of the clock. So we're going to go to the right tank there. I'm also going to confirm that we do have fuel on board, kind of a thing like that. Yeah, we got plenty, no problem. So that looks good to me. So we got that set. Now we're going to go and take the throttle. And what we do to the throttle is you're supposed to do about a 1/2 inch if it's hot and a 1/4 inch if it's cold. Click. That's about as much as you're going to need. You won't need any more than that. So what we're going to do now is we take the mixture and we shove it to the rich. If you're in the middle of the summer, there's actually a really hacky way to get this thing started. What you would do is you put it to the half, crank it, and it would start right away. It's just kind of fun, but we can't do that because it is not the summer right now. Next, what we would do is we go ahead and hit the brakes. The brakes on this one, I love the brake handle on this thing. It's so much better than a Cessna. You push the button down, pull it up towards you, goes click, click, and that's it. You don't have to do anything else, and it will stop you. You can freeze the plane in place with the brakes. They're fantastic on this plane. So what we do now is we hold that. Now we go ahead and prime. You're supposed to use 3 or 4 if it's cold, 1 to 2 if it's hot. This is definitely a 3 prime day today. So what you can't hear is in the real world, you hear it goes, "Ugh!" and it basically starts to suffer when you have enough prime in there. And if we come down here, you'll notice it's giving me a prime or fuel flow required. It's one of those things. So we can just do that again, but that's perfectly fine. I'm not worried about it too much. There's plenty of primer for this thing. So what we do now is we turn on the master switch. You get a bunch of warnings. We turn on our beacon light. Oh, we have a call light on this one, which is kind of nice. It's going to get all grumpy at me. And of course, what we're going to do is we're going to fire up the fuel pump. And the fuel pump is a handy little device. It's going to boost up our fuel pressure, and it's going to work pretty well for us. Afterwards, of course, we look outside. We yell the word clear prop. I take my hand and put my hand on the start. I look around, and oh, that's a winter start. Oh, yes. Yes. Oh, that was nice. So you're probably asking, what do you mean by a winter start? And my reference there, of course, the fact, did you hear go, what are you doing to me, you jerk? And then it caught. That's actually very realistic. Nice job, Just Flight. You got that one right, too. Most airplane manufacturers, or I should say manufacturers, what am I saying? People who do simulated planes do not respect how difficult planes are to start when it gets even remotely cold outside. So we're started up. Of course, the aircraft lights are good. Propeller area is clear. We forgot to yell clear prop. We want to check out oil pressure. Looks good. Oil looks good to me. We're going to make sure all that's good. The other thing we do, too, is there's a little light there that tells you, but one of the things we do need to check, and I'm just giving this thing a second to kind of stabilize. Our check EGT looks good. That looks good to me. Oil temperature looks good. We want to check to make sure the alternator is working. And we know the alternator is working because this will be a happy number. This won't be a sad number. I wish this was a kind of like a charged one, sort of a thing like that. But that's perfectly fine as well. Now, next thing what we do, of course, is fuel pump is going to come off. Okay, the airplane sometimes goes, that's a technical term for the engine not appreciating what I just did to it. And next what we want to do is we want to take the mixture and we want to pull it about halfway back. That's going to be plenty of leaning. Obviously, we try to take off at lean mixture. The engine's going to be like, are you kidding me? Kind of a thing like that. One of the things we also check, too, is the flaps, but I gave that thing about 50 turns, so I'm not really worried about it too much. So now we basically run our way through everything. So we're going to hit our avionics switch, which is this lovely switch right here. Notice what that does to our electrical load here. The other thing, of course, we would do is we'd go ahead and fire this sucker on, kind of a thing like that. I love it, just avionics power kind of a thing. Look at how hard it is to get to that switch, by the way. And then, of course, we have to turn everything on. And that's kind of the fun here. And I love how the fact we have an emergency bus switch here, so I can do one of these things and basically blow everybody out in the event of an emergency. That's okay. But the key thing here is what you'd have to do is basically get your volumes all up, kind of a thing. But notice we don't have a lot of excitement going on here. And that's kind of the fun here. And I appreciate the fact that they didn't go nuts with a lot of those details. You know, they didn't give us any funky buttons or anything like that. You know, we can turn on our ADF functions. We can turn on well, I don't want to listen to that right now. And it's just very, very simplified. You know, that's so awesome in every way. I really, really appreciate it when they take the time to kind of get all those things all kind of preset and arranged rather than sort of not necessarily handing it to you, but like, okay, I love it. It just says, okay, yeah, I'm going to press okay. And sort of it's trying to find my satellites and all that. Love every bit of it. One of the fun things, by the way, is this guy. We didn't have one of those on any of the planes I flew. So that's good. Everybody's running. The engine's all set. We're good to go. The next thing I like to do, of course, is, what is this? I forgot to add all sorts of buttons on here. I'm not going to mess with this because it's a lot of fun. There's a long press for power. I'm just going to shut that down. I don't need it right now. Nice. So one of the things we do now, of course, is we're going to check the ATIS. And VID, ATIS. And I'm just going to take a look. I always forget the frequency. I always got to look it up, kind of a thing. Block Island State, by the way, if you've never flown out here before, it's a bit of an experience, 134775. So one of the experiences is, of course, the weather's always bad here because it's a teeny, teeny, tiny island here. Let's see here. 134775, 134775. Come to. Can't hear anything. Volume's too low. Come on. You can do it. You can do it. Double check to make sure I got that correctly. You did see me turn that on, right? You did see me do that, right? You all saw that. All right, so we would listen to the ATIS, and the way ATIS is basically going to tell us that we're going to be having a ton of wind coming from one side. One fun thing, of course, is when you do traveling around all over the place, you'll find more than one place where your ATIS does not function properly. It's just part of the fun, or you can't detect it, or you can't pick it up, and things like that. So I'm happy with that, so I go ahead and shut that one down. Aha!
12000. Wind 154 at 5. Visibility 10. Sky condition. Few clouds at 3,500 feet, ceiling 5,000 feet overcast. Temperature 1 Celsius. Dew point 10 Celsius.
Woo! That's cold. Interestingly enough, that's interesting. This is different. The one that I actually flew on, the switches wouldn't go that far. It's an on or off. So we got this thing started. Everything's happy. We're ready to basically proceed and head over to our runway here. So I notice here that they said the wind is 154. If I stick my head out the window real quickly, that's going to give us a wind direction basically from here. You can actually see the sock sticking at us. That means we're going to be using this lovely runway right here. Now, like I was mentioning in many of my other videos, many folks who design these aircrafts in these games miss this one detail. And that's when you release the park and brake, it starts rolling immediately. Do you notice that this thing rolled immediately and I didn't have to touch the throttle? They got that correct. Nice job, Just Flight. They're just starting to rack up some points here. We'll definitely give them the kind of benefit there. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to kind of taxi. One thing you don't know about Pipers, by the way, is that the wheel is directly connected to the nose wheel steering. What that means, is that when you go ahead and push that wheel, you feel every single bump. Whereas on a Cessna 172, of course, so when you push the rudder pedals forward for nose wheel steering, you're going to actually be tugging on something, basically a spring for the purposes of trying to get that bit. And now the reason that's so fascinating for us, of course, is that you feel everything in this plane on the ground. Now notice I haven't touched my throttle yet, which is very accurate. Oop-a-doop-a-doop. Oh, see, I really wish I had differential braking. Fortunately, the people who designed the rudder pedals that I did don't do it that way. All right, into the wind, park and brake on. So what we do now, of course, is we do a run-up. And there's a couple things that make this plane a little different with a run-up. One thing, of course, notice we have no cylinder head temperature. We want to make sure we're in the green for oil temperature. It's a kind of bad form if we try to get this thing going before the oil has had a chance to circulate. So this is how we do it. The first thing we do is we check to make sure our controls are free and clear. Of course, when you do that, make sure you look outside so you make sure it is, which it is. I like that. The next thing, of course, we check to make sure our circuit breakers are set, which they are. I like that. Now we make sure our mixture is set to the rich position, which we would. We take our throttle and kick it up to 2,000 RPM rather than the 1,800 everybody's familiar with. Now notice the plane starts shaking. That is a correct detail. They did that right. So now what we do, of course, is we just want to run through all of our gauges, and then we're going to go ahead and do our classic magnetos check. That's a pretty good magneto, not going to lie. And the magnetos are actually both about the same quality. That's actually pretty good. What the? Uh-oh. I'm going to have to put it... Oh, no, it came down a little bit. Usually it's pretty dramatic when you pull that. Let's see, amino check, vacuum check. Oil pressure, fuel pressure, everything else is good. Looks good, looks good, looks good, looks good. All right, so what we do is we pull this all the way out. And we wait for the engine to go. Like the whole plane, I can't simulate it, but the whole plane would rumble, 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 rumble. Kind of a thing like that, but we don't get that. All right, everything's good. We're ready to go. So now we're going to do before takeoff. So the first thing we do is we go between our legs here, and we set this for takeoff trim. It's pretty easy. You just grab that, set that to N. It's going to be perfectly fine for us. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to set our flaps for takeoff. We don't need to. We're not using any takeoff flaps. Transponder is set. So we've got 1200 in the box. Carburetor heat is off. Mixture is rich. Aircraft light as required. We're going to pop on the landing light there just to let everybody know. We're going to turn on our fuel pump. I always forget to shut this one off in flight training, and you can see that I still do that. Cabin window is going to be latched. And again, notice they actually give you a switch for the latch. Love it. Let's go. Oh, I like how it gets quieter in here. I appreciate that. They did that accurately. So again, in this plane, when you first drive in this thing on the ground, and I remember this the first time I flew this as well, is I can't tell you how bouncy the rudder pedals are. They're like, bup, 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 kind of a thing like that. So that's a technical term, by the way. So I'm going to sneak myself up to the edge of the runway here. Go ahead and hold the brake, and I'm going to look very carefully at my approach here. I want to make sure nobody's coming in, and I don't see anybody coming in. Let's get going. So the fun thing here with takeoff in this plane, which I did not know, is not only do you have the goofy pedals, but you have an all-moving tail. Do you see that huge tail we have? Which means if you rotate before you get to 55 knots, got really, really bad news for you. What's going to happen is the whole entire plane is going to try to get in the air before it is ready to get into the air. I can't emphasize how dangerous that is enough. So anyway, I'm pointing roughly where we're going to go here. I notice my wind is kind of crossing me from that direction. So I'm going to take my ailerons. I'm going to go ahead and deflect them into the wind just a little bit. This plane, the ailerons are so stiff compared to a 172. Like a 172, everything kind of feels sort of like loosey-goosey. And this aircraft, everything is very, very tight, like really, really tight. So you have to kind of be ready for that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and execute a standard takeoff here. I'm going to go ahead and release the brakes. We're going to go ahead and give it full power. And we're looking for about 55 knots or so. See how bouncy it is, how sensitive it is? That is very realistic. And all we're going to do is give it a tug. And that's it. Remember, you are not a 180 horsepower fire-breathing monster. You are a Piper. You are a little tiny training plane. This is like not a Tomahawk, which is terrifying to operate airplane. This is very much a much smoother plane. And the air is so crisp right now. You just cannot believe how crisp it is. So our VX on this plane is 63. Our VY is actually 79. So despite how many years it's been since I've flown a Warrior specifically, I fly an Archer all the time. But of how long it is, I still got that kind of muscle memory, kind of a thing like that. I kind of like that. So, of course, after we go ahead and get going, one of the things we can do is we get our flaps out of the way, which we did. We can go ahead and get our hand-aiding landing light off. We don't need that anymore. Of course, flying around, anything around Block Island, you have to be tremendously careful because of the amount of traffic that comes down here. And one thing I don't know that they model anymore. Let's see if they do. Oh, they're there. See the windmills? Yeah, they actually did a nice job. Call me pleasantly surprised. I guess pleasantly surprised. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make our way towards the mainland. We're going to enjoy a nice, incredibly easy climb here because this aircraft is so lightweight and the air is so thick today. By thick, I mean it's not like, thick like hot and muggy. It's thick in the sense that it's very, very, very cold, crisp air, which gives us fantastic performance. So I'm basically going to pull myself towards the north here, and we're going to start our climb upwards. Now, the Warriors that I flew never had autopilots, and one of the things they actually give you in this aircraft, which is kind of nice, is they do give you an autopilot, which is kind of neat. They actually give you an old-fashioned autopilot. And of course, for me, that's like quadruple points for awesome, kind of a thing like that. But what they do is if you actually come down here, you'll see it's either on or off. And if you just hit it on, notice it just goes autopilot, and that's it. Autopilot's on. That's all you get. Notice there's nothing special, and of course, it's trying to run off to that heading that I said a minute ago, because that's the default heading. Go ahead and flip the autopilot off there. Isn't that so interesting? It's like nothing special. And like I said, it's just kind of its default mode. It is not a wing leveler by default. And I just find that one of the more fascinating things about this plane. Go ahead and hold that in. And let's get that to about 3 degrees. I like that. Go ahead and give it just a couple of flaps of trim. Go ahead and get it all lined up for us. Again, this plane is very stiff on the controls, and that's actually very realistic as well. Now we can pop on heading, and we should be good to go. Delightful. So during a climb with this aircraft, we definitely are going to be using full power here. We're not going to be using anything less than full power on account of the fact that we're not a constant speed propeller. We have no cow flaps. As a matter of fact, not only do we not have cow flaps, but you know what else we don't have? Cylinder head temperature gauge or anything like that. The big thing for us during a climb is to keep an eye on monitor on a few different systems. Of course, in the real world, it'll be the radio. The other thing we want to keep an eye on is fuel pressure, because remember, we're a low-wing airplane. Oil temperature, again, this is a good indicator of just how hot everything is. You can see right now it's cold outside, so that's running pretty smooth. RPM, you're never going to have a problem with in a climb, and obviously if your ammeter suddenly drops off, it's going to give you issues. One of the fun things with the ammeter, by the way, is when that fails, this light will come on, and it'll actually give you a heads up. This light will come on to give you a heads up that has failed, which is kind of handy. Lastly, of course, is our exhaust gas temperature, which is basically going to be what's dictating how nice our engine's running. One of the cool things with Pipers, though, is you don't have to adjust the mixture until you cross 5,000 feet, which makes it a little bit easier for us as far as kind of maintaining what everything needs to do. Now, one of the things I mentioned a minute ago is this particular aircraft does have an autopilot, but notice it does not have anything in here as far as being able to dictate what your pitches. There's nothing on here for that. This basically only runs left and right, if you want to think about it another way. One thing they did do to kind of help us out a little bit is they snuck a little button in here. There is an altitude hold button now, and there's also a vertical speed button. So if you want to be that guy, you can actually come in here and push that button, because the earlier versions of this plane, when it first came out, did not have those features. So as you can see, this is a really cool little plane. And what we're going to be doing in the second video, of course, is doing a little bit of navigation. And then, of course, in the third video, we'll go ahead and explore getting this thing on the ground. Enjoy.